Sorry, buddy.
Based on observable
I could have
facts,
popped
is
super and
that there
saved
is no
myself. I was too slow
full-scale
on that.
military invasion or formal assumption of governmental authority
I was
by
also
the
like aggressively
US.
chasing
What
that
appears to
wanted
have
guy,
occurred
even though we didn't
instead
need
is
to.
the
It was
removal
stupid.
of Maduro while allowing the rest of the governing apparatus to remain in place, under conditions that are not publicly known. Whether and how this was negotiated
All of
is
these guys
unclear.
are fighting
So
each
far,
other.
these assumptions appear to be true.
Oh no, they're
As
hitting my
following
ghost. I'm
Maduro's
stupid.
capture, he was immediately replaced with Vice President Delcy Rodriguez.
Looks like there's an
who was
unstoppable bro
sworn in
next to
as
me.
acting president. In a public statement, Rodriguez
And there's
would
3
comment,
dudes just
quote,
hitting my
"We will
ghost.
never again be a colony of any empire," referring to the nation's previous
Hear the
colonization
goat?
from Spain. Despite this, Rodriguez, who has a reputation for pragmatism, has been willing to work with the US government in their goals for the country. It generally seems that both nations have reached an understanding that Venezuela will be left alone, as long as the government adheres to President Trump's grand vision. As for why the US did any of this in the first place, we just need to remember the 5 Ds. Dodge, drugs, democracy, dig, and dodge. To start with,
Now you
Dodge,
fly
many
away?
of
Okay.
President Trump's detractors believe
I'll
the
come get ya.
invasion is a very
Hang tight.
convenient distraction from the Epstein
champion's
files.
low.
The Epstein Files Transparency Act mandated that the files needed to be released in their entirety by the 19th of December. However, by this time, less than 1% of the files were released. Moving on to drugs, and this was the original justification for the buildup of warships along the Venezuelan coast. Although
Anyone wearing any
strikes on
shiny armor?
suspected drug boats are still ongoing, Venezuela's drug manufacturing capacity
You just died to make me
is
feel less
dwarfed
bad about
by
dying.
other South American nations, such as Colombia and Mexico. At best, drugs are a nice side effect, and at worst, a convenient excuse. The third D is democracy. As we previously stated, Nicolas Maduro was basically a dictator within Venezuela who greatly enriched himself at the expense of his own people. However, although his removal is a huge win for the nation, it's still not clear whether the regime he left behind will be more beneficial to the general Venezuelan population. More so than democracy, President Trump considers Venezuela part of the American regional sphere of influence. The Venezuelan government under Maduro was particularly close to some of America's global rivals, such as Russia, China, and Cuba. President Trump would comment after the Venezuelan intervention, quote,
Q
"American
Thresher,
dominance in
blow
the
my
Western
cock."
Hemisphere will never be questioned again. Won't happen." Commenters have also suggested that the president is doing a form of legacy farming, as his second term has seen him speedrun pages for future history books. Notably, President Trump has been fixated on receiving a Nobel Peace Prize, an award he didn't receive in 2025. Trump did, however, win the inaugural FIFA Peace Prize in December, which he accepted less than a month before yoinking the president of Venezuela. The 2025 Nobel Peace Prize ultimately went to former Venezuelan opposition candidate Maria Corina Machado, who would later gift the prize to President Trump in the middle of January. According to the Nobel Committee, recipients can do whatever they want with their awards and prize money. But just
What do you do
because
to solo
someone
charges? I know you've been
owns a
picking 'em
Nobel
up.
Prize doesn't
What's the
mean they
mechanic?
actually have
You
one.
dunk 'em on the
Commenting on the
podiums.
gift,
Put it-
the
put it in
president
the
would
thing.
state, quote,
Okay, gotcha.
"Maria
Oh, I guess
presented
it's a
me
giant
with
fucking
prize for the
indicator.
work I've
Yeah.
done. Such a wonderful gesture of mutual respect. Thank you, Maria." The fourth D is dig, which refers to President Trump's plan to extract oil from Venezuela's enormous untapped reserves. We couldn't find a coherent explanation for his plan for Venezuelan oil, but here are 3 quotes at 3 different times that we think do a pretty good job at explaining his intentions. In President Trump's own words, quote, "We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country." On to the second quote, "We're going to rebuild the oil infrastructure, which requires billions of dollars that will be paid for by the oil companies directly. They will be reimbursed for what they're doing, but it's going to be paid, and we're going to get the oil flowing." Finally, the third quote, "This oil will be sold at its market price, and that money will be controlled by me, as President of the United States of America, to ensure it is used to benefit the people of Venezuela and the United States." Although the
You're live.
president stated that
Go
he
team.
had already had conversations with US oil companies prior to Maduro's capture, 4 oil industry executives confirmed that neither ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, or Chevron have had any such conversations. President Trump would later meet with around 24 oil executives on the 9th of January, where enthusiasm for US oil extraction was mixed. Exxon CEO Darren Woods would specifically call Venezuela uninvestable, and not without good cause. Exxon has already had its assets in Venezuela seized on 2 separate occasions, and setting up shop in Venezuela a third time is a long and expensive process. Venezuela's oil infrastructure has greatly deteriorated through years of mismanagement, and political uncertainty doesn't promote much confidence in such an investment. If Venezuela decides to nationalize these assets for a third time,
You literally almost
US
killed me.
administration changes
That was
its
1 HP.
priorities, that leaves these companies exposed to a huge amount of risk. Regardless, the 14th of January saw the United States announce that it had completed its first sales of Venezuelan oil, roughly valued at $500 million. Meanwhile, acting President Rodriguez stated that she was submitting a reform that would once again allow foreign investment into fields with no existing infrastructure. As we mentioned, oil infrastructure takes a long time to set up, so we won't know the success of these ambitions anytime soon. The last D is dodge, which is just another reminder that the president still has to deal with the Epstein files. In terms of the overall reaction to the United States yoinking the head of another nation, this was about as mixed as you might expect. Venezuelans within Venezuela appeared to be split, with many celebrating Maduro's capture, others worried about an uncertain future,
hello, Mr.
and some
Tank.
who just wanted their president back. Venezuelans abroad were unsurprisingly more united, with most celebrating the capture of a man who represented everything wrong with their country. Public opinion within the United States was about as mixed as it could possibly be. An Ipsos poll found that 33% of US adults approved of the intervention to remove Maduro, 34% disapproved, and 33% were unsure. As you've probably guessed, approval and disapproval generally came down to party lines. Notably, even those opposed didn't seem to care that Maduro was removed from office, but rather that the Trump administration
Nice,
did the right thing for the wrong reasons. Democratic Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer would echo this sentiment in his own words, quote, "Let me be clear. Maduro is an illegitimate dictator, but launching military action without congressional authorization, without a federal plan for what comes next, is reckless." Internationally, South American countries were generally opposed to the intervention. Brazilian President Lula da Silva commented, quote, "Attacking countries in flagrant violation of international law is the first step toward a world of violence, chaos, and instability." Meanwhile, Colombian President Gustavo Petro said that the intervention was an assault on the sovereignty of Latin America. Another critic of the
Wait, does
Venezuela
this mission always have a
intervention
tormentor?
was the Russian government, with its foreign ministry stating, quote, "It is crucial, above all, to prevent further escalation and focus on finding a way out of the situation through dialogue. We proceed from the assumption that all partners who have claims against one another should seek ways to resolve their problems through dialogue-based solutions. We are ready to support them in this." The day before this statement was released, the Russian government killed a 3-year-old Ukrainian child when it struck an apartment building in Kharkiv. Meanwhile, UK's Keir Starmer would comment that the United Kingdom, quote, "regard Maduro as an illegitimate president and we shed no tears about the end of his regime." French President Emmanuel Macron was more concerned with the well-being of Venezuela, stating that the transition of power must be peaceful, democratic, and respectful of the will of the Venezuelan people. Unfortunately,
I know he's on my
still
right.
we just
I
don't know
am
about
getting
January's
shredded by those
American
turrets. I had to
intervention in
reposition, sorry.
Venezuela. President Trump's grand vision for
In
the
general, this
country,
is- wow, this is a
whether
bit
US
dicey.
involvement will benefit the average Venezuelan, or whether other world leaders are about to be yoinked, are all questions we don't have answers to. The good news is that we don't plan on going anywhere, so feel free to subscribe to keep up with any future developments. It's not often that we get to talk about things that are genuinely good and inspiring, but we felt you've all earned a little treat. Since the Apollo 17 mission in December 1972, humans have not ventured outside the orbit of the planet, but that's soon about to change. The planned Artemis 2 will take 4 astronauts on a 10-day mission flyby around the
Okay,
moon
why is
on
there
a
a
journey
yellow
of
bar
over
Scorpius turret, bro?
600,000
What am I
miles,
looking at?
or
Also, I know you've been cutting that
960,000
tormentor for an hour and a
kilometers.
half. I'm
For
coming home,
reference,
sorry.
that's like going from Perth to Sydney twice.
And a billion
What
ads
would
in
lead
here.
to the Artemis missions initially began in 2017 with Space Directive 1. Space Directive 1 was a policy
Hitting him with my heavy
directive
sniper for
NASA
33
signed by
damage.
President Trump, directing NASA to return humans to the moon and establish
Optimal
a permanent
gameplay.
base there, before eventually moving to human
that one was for
exploration
400.
of Mars and beyond.
Oh,
The program
355.
was named Artemis after the twin sister goddess of the Greek god Apollo. In 2020, the Artemis program expanded into a broader project called the Artemis Accords, a program
Mr. Tormentor.
encouraging international
Oh,
cooperation
is he gonna
in
one-shot
space
me?
exploration, emphasizing sharing
Nope,
of
not if my
scientific
savior saves the day.
technology And for the peaceful
There's a bunch of ads above you. I'm gonna go take care of them.
As of this month, 60 countries have signed the accords, with the most recent being Portugal on the 11th of January this year. The first steps to return to the moon began with the Artemis 1 mission in 2022, testing the new rocket
Shay.
and
He's
space
finishable.
capsule, which will bring crew
The
to subsequent
Tormentor is?
launches. The
Yeah.
rocket, creatively
I
called
didn't know you could finish
the
Tormentors.
Space Launch System, lifted off on November 19, 2022.
You're a stud.
After several
been
delays,
You basically did
$500
99.99% of that guy's
Orion
HP by
space
yourself, by the
underwent
way.
extensive testing and experimentation while
I
on flight,
shot him with my. I
including
broke
2
one shoulder blade and I
flybys
hit him
of
like
the
3
moon.
times in
It
the chest with a
eventually
sniper.
splashed back
After
down
that
on
was all
Earth
you.
on the 11th of December and was whisked off for post-flight testing. Tests showed higher than expected heat shield wear, leading to over 2 years of investigation. After the issue was
If you
identified,
had
a
div
revised
on,
re-entry
this would
profile was
be
created and
amazing.
worst-case scenario testing proved the
Damn.
capsule safe. Plans then moved to a
Divine
crewed launch
intervention.
of Artemis 2.
Oh, I didn't even
Artemis
think
2
about
is a
damage
crewed
abusing that.
dress rehearsal of a
Probably
crewed
could've, should've,
moon
would've.
landing in the coming years.
No,
Yeah,
Four
he
definitely
needs
could've done.
3 Americans and a Canadian
No, I could have run
will be
Stronghold with a
launched
different
atop an
sword and
SLS
just still run
rocket
Divinity.
on a
Like, that would have been
10-day
fine.
mission. Unlike the
need
Artemis
Praxic
1
Blade.
mission, the capsule
definitely
will
don't need
first
Praxic
orbit
Blade.
the Earth
You don't.
several
You could have
times
run
before
Vex
flying to the
Caliber
moon.
or,
the
like,
astronauts
literally
will
anything
practice
else.
critical
Caliber.
techniques, including manual
Oh, I guess I
flying,
couldn't have run
craft
Vex Caliber
while
if I was
in
running Div.
space.
So you could have run that sword
Pass
from
by the
Heresy.
far side
I could have
of
run
the moon
Tenacia,
before
baby.
returning to
That's
the
what it
Earth
would've
and
went.
splashing
That too,
down in the Pacific
Works, man.
Ocean. The mission will set several records. It will be the first time since 1972 that humans have
Much prefer
left the
Senassi over
Earth's
Slammer.
orbit. The first time that a non-American citizen has left Earth's orbit, and the first woman to leave Earth orbit. Tim, the engineer who wrote this story, wanted to point out that
Holy
as the moon
shit, these
itself is
headshots are not
also
headshotting,
orbiting
bro.
Earth, whether the astronauts will be technically leaving Earth's orbit is up for debate. Meanwhile, Swag, who edited this story, wanted to point out that he really doesn't give a shit. The crew of 4 is also the largest for a moon mission, as the Apollo missions only had a crew of 3. The Apollo 11 moon mission famously had Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and that other guy. When the capsule passes as far as 4,600 miles beyond the far side of the moon, it will be the furthest humans have ever been from Earth, a distance of 250,000 miles away from the surface, or 402,300 kilometers. The crew of 4 is made up of 3 who have already been to space, and 1 making their first flight. The mission commander is Reed Wiseman. Wiseman previously spent 165 days aboard the International Space Station as a flight engineer and prolific scientist. Wiseman and his crews have completed over 300 experiments in space, including a record 82 hours of science in a single week. Wiseman also served as chief of the astronaut office from 2020 to 2022. The pilot is Victor Glover. Glover previously piloted the SpaceX Crew Dragon 1.
Oh, the good
to
news is we have a
ISS,
million
where he
revives.
also served as a flight engineer. Glover also served as a
That
fighter
is-
jet
that
test
is a
pilot
plus.
in the Navy testing the FA-18 and its variants.
I want
The
Archer's
mission
tempo.
specialist is Christina Koch. Koch spent nearly the entirety of 2019 on the ISS, spending 328 consecutive days in space. While on the ISS, she participated in the first all-female spacewalk. She also served as the branch chief of the assigned crew
That's what I
branch of
wanted.
the astronaut office, and worked as a technical integrator for NASA. Koch will be the first female to
Yeah, it's
leave
explosive
Earth
too,
orbit.
right?
The other mission specialist is Jeremy
Is
Hansen.
Explosive Ed actually
Hansen is a
good? Because
Canadian
numbers-wise,
astronaut
it
and
seemed like
former
that
It's
big.
useful more for like
Hansen
specific
previously
mechanic things, like
served
it
on
one
NASA
shots
missions
taking
on
eyes
Earth,
on Warlord's
including
Ruin,
the
for
Deep Sea
instance, and stuff like that.
Expedition and
Okay,
several
okay.
Arctic geology missions. This will be Hansen's first space
I was honestly
flight.
just wanting it
Hansen will be
for
the first Canadian
like
and
Archer's
first
tempo and
non-American
jolting
to leave
feedback.
Earth
I got
orbit.
one with
The launch has 3
Rolling
windows
Storm,
of
Shoot
5
to
days
Loot,
each in the coming
Archers,
months. The
however you
2nd
pronounce
to
that
7th
dragonfly
of
looking
February,
one,
the
jolting
2nd to
and
7th of
explosive.
March, and the 1st to 6th of April. During these launch windows, a go decision will set a 49-hour countdown in motion, beginning with the arrival of the launch team and ending with the liftoff of the rocket. The capsule will reach a top speed of 25,000
Let me go grab
miles
some of these
per
turrets
hour,
before
or
I deal with the boss.
32.8 times the speed of sound. On
That
its
is true.
journey.
Slasher
If
got
all goes
milked by one of
well,
those
a
yesterday.
crew landing to the moon of Artemis 3 can be expected in the coming years. Currently, the mission is planned for the middle of
Okay,
2027, but experts
okay.
believe
Well,
that
I don't
due to
know
delays
what
to the
that
Starship
was,
Human
but
Landing
okay.
System, HLS,
You get melted?
and the aforementioned
Burn.
heat
I died
shields,
to a
the mission
burn.
will not launch until
Huh.
2028.
Unfortunately, my body is
at
literally
the
at this guy's
earliest. Rest
tippy
assured,
toes.
whenever it does launch, we'll be here to
That is unfortunate.
enthusiastically cover
Oh, he
it.
teleported. Okay.
In the final days of 2025, demonstrations broke out across the nation of Iran.
Tan,
the
I
grievances
think
among
you can get me.
protesters were mostly
I
economic,
can.
with the
I just don't
country
like the
facing
stress.
sky-high
Yeah,
food
valid,
prices
100% valid.
and record-setting currency depreciation. As of time of writing, a single US dollar is now
You're the
worth
goat?
over 1 million Iranian rial. Iran's government has long been mismanaged and corrupt, but the last few years have only compounded these issues. The nation lost a major ally with the overthrow of the Assad regime in Syria. Their proxy forces of Hamas and Hezbollah have been severely crippled, and its nuclear program was bombed by America. On top of this, the country has been experiencing severe water shortages due to government mismanagement, an energy deficit causing
Yeah, I don't
repeated
think
power
my,
disruptions, and sharply
My
rising
Oathkeeper's
costs
is doing
for
literally
essential
anything.
goods.
Doesn't
To make
increase the
matters
damage at
worse,
all.
it was reported
Even on
that the
Leviathans,
Iranian
which is
government
weird.
was planning
It
to
should do
increase
that.
taxes as of March this year, putting even more financial pressure on citizens. It's probably not too surprising that all of these self-inflicted problems would spark the largest wave of protests since the nation's 1979 revolution, with an estimated
Just shooting this
5
guy with
million
refurbished
people
over and over
taking to
again.
the streets. What started
bubble,
purely
okay.
from economic grievances quickly expanded into broader outrage against the Iranian government as a whole. Long-held frustration against authoritarianism, mandatory hijab enforcement, and human rights abuses were just some of the many pressure points that escalated the movement, which would quickly spread to all 31 provinces in the country. Protesters conducted general strikes, lit fires in the streets, and set off fireworks to vent their frustrations. On the 8th of January, the Iranian government cut off the nation's internet access, making footage and concrete information about the protests increasingly difficult to find. What we do know, however, is that the Iranian government under Supreme Leader Ali
got you.
Khamenei has had a long history of brutally cracking down on similar demonstrations. In case you've forgotten who Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei is, he's the guy who famously said, quote, "Islam does not need economists." Economists.
Well, now I'm
disagree.
scared to walk up a
Exact
melee. I'm
figures
after
on the number of
it just set me on
protesters
fire
gunned
and
down by the
instigated me
government
last
is
time.
currently impossible to pinpoint. Previous protests between 2019 and 2020 saw death tolls between 300 to 1,500, while the more recent
Also,
Masa
where is
Amini
the guy?
protests
I know he
sat
dropped
around
down.
550 dead. Reports
Middle,
within
probably,
Iran
if he's in the
this
last
month
portion.
have been much higher on the lower end. The Iranian government reported a
Dan's
death
probably out
toll
there
of
soloing
around
him right now.
5,000 people, although
Yeah, there he
senior
is.
leaders
Okay.
estimated that the real figure could be as high as 20,000 dead and 330,000 injured. Just for context, these are higher death tolls than when the Ottoman Empire
Okay, yeah,
committed
holy
genocide
tits.
against the Assyrians
You
within
get melee
Iran
range, he
during
just
the
sets you on
First World
fire
War.
and you die
The
so
extra
fast.
flourishes of cruelty used when
Okay,
cracking
yeah,
down
dude,
on
holy
protesters
shit.
is
Okay, that's not
arguably
gonna happen.
more shocking than the death tolls themselves. Although difficult to verify, there have been numerous reports of the regime hiring foreign mercenaries
Jesus
from
Christ.
Iraq,
Okay, I guess I'm just gonna have to
Afghanistan,
snipe him.
Pakistan, and Lebanon.
I mean, I
to
could take his
help
aggro
quell the
if you
unrest.
want.
The mother
I don't know
of
if that's
one
actually
such
useful,
recruit
but
stated that he was
Right.
paid $600 for a month-long
Is that a yes?
contract. It's believed
Oh, you
that
just said
these
that you got the
mercenaries
rate,
are being
okay.
employed to bolster the government's ability to resist the uprising,
Honestly,
and
do
as
whatever you
insurance
want.
against the Iranian police
So you can carry me?
flipping to
Valid.
join the protesters. It also helps that
not
many
how
of
this
the
carrying,
recruits
I feel
don't
like I'm
speak
doing
You're
the local
carrying me.
language and
You're
would be less likely
carrying.
to empathize
You
with the
legend.
people they're gunning down. Even those lucky enough to escape with injuries still aren't safe from the cruelty
Some
of the
call him the
Iranian
goat.
government, with reports of security
call him
forces
Tan.
raiding hospitals to kill those who have already been wounded. This has led to a situation where those in need of medical care don't go to a hospital for fear of being killed or detained. As a response, some
Okay, making
citizens
myself
have
invisible
opened up
does
their
make
homes to be used as makeshift
aiming down the
hospitals,
sights of this
with
thing kinda
doctors
difficult.
visiting in their own
As
time.
funny as that
As you might
is.
imagine, being detained is one of the worst fates for a suspected protester, with many facing sexual abuse, torture, and even execution. There have also been reports where detainees have been injected with unknown substances, and a UK government report suggests that security forces have been using deadly chemical weapons against those demonstrating. Perhaps the
Where
most
is the boy who
insulting
drops the
part
thing?
of Ali Khamenei's
Where is the boy who
crackdown is
drops
that
the
the
thing?
families of those killed are charged for the bullets used to kill them. One such
I thought the weak
family
point of the
was told that
Thresher
they
was in
have
the
to
engines.
Pay the equivalent of $7,000 to
I
get
just
their
missed. Oh,
son's body
I
back.
died to a
The
drop
average
pod,
person
dude.
don't have one, I
earns
don't
less than
think.
I
$100
died to a
month,
drop
making
pod.
such payments
Oh my
entirely
goodness.
prohibitive.
Save
It's
me,
much
King.
worse when you consider that the government who killed their son is also the reason the economy
But also
is
take
in
your time and don't let me
shambles.
throw the
As
run,
of time
thank
of
you.
writing, the protests
You're a
are
Giga
still
Chad and a
ongoing,
sexy boy.
and we don't
Okay.
know whether Ali Khamenei's regime will ultimately topple. Khamenei and his inner circle have reportedly moved a
Well, now I'm
large
fucking
amount
terrified of
gold
standing
to
anywhere.
Russia, which is where the Supreme Leader plans to flee if his security forces
Just don't
decide to
stand where the
flee.
drop pods
Whether
come in.
this happens is still unclear.
They don't know those locations,
However,
unfortunately.
experts comment that this has been the closest the regime has been from falling in its 47 years of power. As an analysis by The Economist explains, quote, Iran's rulers are merciless because of their weakness. They have nowhere to turn and nothing to offer their people but violence. As we mentioned, it's very difficult to verify anything coming out of Iran this month. However, we wish the protesters all the best, and hope that they one day manage to throw Ali Khamenei into an active
No.
volcano. As always,
No.
a link to all
Alright,
our sources
with that,
is down in the description.
I'm done.
On the
What do you
11th
mean
of
you're done?
January, government authorities
Gotta go to the
in
gym.
Indonesia and Malaysia outright banned
Actually, we'll
Elon
give it one more
Musk's
try.
generative
We'll give it one more
AI
try.
image tool.
We'll give it one more try.
Grok is tied to the social media
Give it another
platform
try.
Twitter, and
Dying
is used
to things
extensively
randomly
around the
spawning on
world
top of you
for
and
its
behind
AI
you is
capabilities.
not a good time.
In case you've forgotten who
Would you like a
Elon
hand?
Musk is, he's the guy
you want,
who
yeah.
famously said, quote,
That-
that felt
GTA
really,
required
real-
shooting police officers
whatever.
in the opening
Every
scene.
single death that
Just
run
couldn't
was
do it.
random
Anyway,
shit,
the
but
reason behind
now I know
Grok's
about the
ban
random
was
shit, so
because
it should be
people kept
fine.
using it to generate
Random
pornography, and
shit.
Grok's restrictions
Good
didn't
old
extend to images
Indeed.
of children.
Alright.
Grok was being used
Sam,
I
I'm gonna
will
give it a-
give on
which
so
for
we can
YouTube's
nuke shit.
moderation system
Oh,
stands
yeah, I'll
for
put the-
Cyberpunk 2077. Between late December
I mean, you
and
can run div if
January,
you want.
1 year after Grok's image
No,
generation
run around with
capabilities were
Praxic and
introduced,
Dia.
Twitter
Useless
users
YouTuber.
generated hundreds of thousands
Do you guys have
of
unstop
explicit
stuff?
images on the
I'll
platform.
take
Images
Uh,
of other
stops
users were modified by Grok to
bows,
remove
so
clothes.
I don't
put
think I
them
have a
in
bow for
different
Oh
Yeah,
shit, I'm dumb. I
unfortunately.
literally, that's how often I use bows. I didn't even know that bows were
mayonnaise.
unstopped. Like, that's
Indonesia's
hilarious.
digital minister, Mutant
I
Affleck,
can
stated the
handle
countrywide
barriers
ban
with
was to,
sniper.
quote, protect women, children,
And
and the broader
overloads,
public
I
from the
can-
I
risks
can also
of
do
fake
barriers.
pornographic content
No.
generated
I have
by
unstoppable
AI
bow.
technology.
I have a bow
Malaysia's
on.
message was similar, with government authorities
Where's my
stating
thing?
that the
I
ban
think it's
comes
in my
after,
vault.
quote, the repeated misuse of Grok to generate obscene, sexually explicit, indecent, grossly offensive, and non-consensual manipulated images, including content involving women and minors. Meanwhile,
Maybe
European
just
Commission
ended.
spokesperson Thomas Reynier stated
Back
that
in
the
again.
Commission is very seriously looking into reports of X and Grok's
Yeah, I'm ready when you guys are.
showing explicit
Oh,
sexual content
I
with
need to
some
put
it on
images
English, yeah.
generated with
Okay, cool.
childlike images. In addition, India's Ministry
Q,
of Economics
Q.
and
Or should I
Information
put
Technology
oh, this one-
ordered X
oh.
Run.
to
You can run the exact same thing
immediately
you ran
undertake a
last time, dude. We were doing just
comprehensive
fine until we
technical
died
and
to
governance
bullshit.
level
So.
review
I have
of
a bow with
Grok.
burning ambition.
Elon has stated that anyone who
Fabulous.
uses Grok to make illegally generated imagery will face consequences. This comes on the heels of XAI being sued by Ashley St. Clair, one of the mothers of Musk's 14 children. The lawsuit alleges that a picture of her 14-year-old was altered by Grok to put her in a bikini covered in swastikas. We can only assume that this would be as traumatic as having to play the first mission in GTA 5.
Okay.
Despite the controversy,
Hell yeah.
Musk has remained staunch in his attitude towards sexual
Isn't
content on his
Leroy
platform,
the,
believing that governments simply
one
wish
from
to
Edge of Fame?
suppress free speech by censoring all forms of pornographic content online. Restrictions have been
So I need to complete
implemented
the
on
campaign for that
Grok's
one again.
AI
Okay.
image generating capabilities, geo-blocking
Fun.
videos to generate images
Alright,
of real
just
people
realized
in
that my bow
bikinis,
is power
underwear,
level
and in the
3,
nude.
4,
All AI
32.
image generating
It'll be
technology with Grok will be
fine.
limited to paying users on the platform, and only upper body nudity
You sure?
featuring fake and imaginary
No,
AI
but
people will
we'll-
be allowed
right.
on the platform per United States film standards.
It has burning
It should be
ambition, I can
noted that
ignite.
although these tools have been banned in Indonesia and Malaysia, users have reported that these restrictions can be sidestepped pretty easily with VPNs or DNS tweaks. The explicit image controversy comes just as US Defense
Alright, here we
Secretary Pete
go.
Hegseth announced that Grok will be integrated into the Pentagon. Hegseth would comment in his own words, quote,
Well,
very
Free
soon
People's
we
gonna
will
make
have
this
the world's
easy,
leading AI
'cause
models
we weren't-
on every
we had a million
unclassified and
revives.
classified network throughout our department. He would go on to say that this new AI acceleration strategy
That guy fell
would
over.
unleash experimentation,
Divinity.
eliminate
Oh, are you
bureaucratic
actually using it
barriers,
on the
focus
champs?
on
Okay.
investments,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
demonstrate the
they just
execution
fall
approach
over.
needed to ensure
Yeah, I
lead
know.
in military AI and
I just figured
throws
you'd
more
save it for the
dominance
boss,
into the
but
future.
obviously-
Oh, no,
Some
I'll have enough
commenters
ammo
believe
generation
that
for this whole
integrating a
thing.
generative
Okay, cool.
AI that called itself Mecha Hitler into the most powerful military in the history of mankind is probably a bad idea.
Thresher,
Others
careful.
state that if Grok's main appeal is generating child pornography, giving it unrestricted access to the US government is going to give it an exciting new wealth of training data. As AI rapidly impacts everything from RAND prices, water availability, and even our own perception of reality, future incidents and lawsuits are inevitably in a continuous battle between AI companies and lawmakers around the world. Regular viewers of the channel should probably expect this to be a common segment going forward. We now come to one of the stupidest stories we've ever had to cover, a situation that's being called the Greenland
Mr. Funny
Crisis.
Gold Man.
Since the start of 2026, US President Donald Trump has been increasingly vocal about his desire to annex, purchase, or otherwise militarily take Greenland. The president's desire for the US to own Greenland has long been known to the public, and his administration put forward several offers to buy the territory from Denmark during his first administration. In fact, America itself has had a long
Yeah, see, I'm
history
just still
of trying
running.
to acquire the island.
Oh, yeah,
with
there it goes.
proposals
Bye.
being put forward as early as the 1860s, coinciding
Absolutely
with the US
falling over,
acquisition
dude.
of Alaska. Since then, the
Idiot.
US has been interested in Greenland from both an economic and security perspective. Economically, Greenland heavily relies on fishing, with the industry making up 90% of the territory's exports, and employs 15 to 16% of its population. Greenland does, however, have an untapped wealth of minerals, including gold, uranium, and presumably deep substrated foliated calcite. The problem is that although the materials are there, the process of extracting them is unfathomably difficult. Many deposits are located above the Arctic Circle, with little to no existing infrastructure. The location also poses visibility challenges, with parts of the territory experiencing total darkness for months at a time. The minerals themselves are also located below a polar ice sheet a mile thick, making extraction even harder. Commenting on the difficulty of mining in Greenland, founder and senior fellow at the Arctic Institute, Malte Humpert, would state, quote, "The idea of turning Greenland into America's rare earth factory is science fiction."
Alright, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Mine on the moon. In some respects, it's worse.
You have to wait for it to catch on
From a
fire.
security perspective, Greenland does act as an excellent strategic location within Europe, with the US
This is stupid.
occupying the island during World War II,
Oh, I'm stupid.
Game is
further
stupid. I want a
expanding its
salad.
presence during the
I'm
Cold
stupid.
War.
I do-
The
salad
government
actually
of
did sound
Denmark
good, but I
initially
don't
wanted the
understand
United
what
States to
Why do you
leave
want a
after
salad?
the Allied victory, but figured a few US bases was worth the
I
trouble
want to
of
feel more
having them around.
Kardashian.
Fast forward to 2026, and President Trump has repeatedly stated that part of his desire to control Greenland is to prevent Russia and China from expanding into the region. We currently have no evidence that Russia or China have any interest in controlling Greenland. Russia is
But they're
already
very around me.
struggling with Ukraine without getting dogpiled by NATO, and China is located here on a map. It's true that China remains
Holy shit.
interested in
Oh, no.
investing in Greenland, but China has its own priorities when it comes to regional expansion. All of these factors make it puzzling as to why President Trump would want Greenland in the first place. In terms of natural resources, Greenland has been open to US investment, but the extraction of minerals poses more of a practical challenge, as opposed to
Another
a
one up on
political
me.
one. The security case
Right
is
there.
even more perplexing. The US government has long been given a considerable amount of flexibility to use the territory for military installations.
Hey, get away from the wall.
Furthermore, the US and Denmark are already long-standing allies. If America
That shit
wants
is so
more bases
broken,
on the island,
dude.
it just
Oh
has
my
to
God.
ask nicely.
I
When
did an
asked
equilibrium
why
run last
the
night.
US
I think I already
needed
said
to
this to you
control
earlier, Ace, but
Greenland
I did an
earlier
equilibrium
this
last
month,
night and we killed the
President
boss in
Trump
under 2
stated
seconds.
in his own words,
Oh,
quote,
God.
"Because that's what I feel is
I didn't know about
psychologically good for
the run,
success.
but I
think
did
that
know you did
ownership gives you
equilibrium.
a thing that you can't do with. You're talking
Well,
about
I didn't know that
lease or
you
treaty.
killed him in 2
Ownership
seconds.
gives you
Sorry,
things
wording.
and elements that you can't get from just signing a document. This statement, and many like it, started to scare the absolute shit out of America's closest allies. US annexation of Greenland would effectively spell the end of the long-standing NATO alliance, pit US and European interests against each other, and open
Do you
up
guys
the
know
door
happen to
for
know what the
further US
frozen damage buff
imperialist
is? Like how
ambitions.
much? The
We should
number, I
also
mean?
remember that the Trump administration
Collaborate.
has already yoinked
When
the
people are
Syrian
frozen,
state
they take
this
more
month.
damage.
So
That's
other
double? Okay.
NATO countries were
It's
taking
double on
these
melee, I
comments
think.
very seriously. This
But
also
not on
comes
weapon
right
hits?
after a report by the Danish government in December that classified the United States as a potential
You take
threat
wait. You
for
deal
the
less
first
damage
time
weapons when they're
in
frozen?
history. The
Really?
situation got even stranger
Oh.
on the 19th of December
Okay.
when a letter from President Trump
Unless you have Whisper of Rending, in
in
which case you do a little bit more.
The letter, word for word, reads, "Dear Jonas, considering
But that's
your
only with
country
primary
decided to
weapons.
not give me the Nobel
Yeah.
Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, I no longer feel
Take
an
all the help we
obligation to
can
think
get.
purely
Very fun.
of
Very
peace,
fun, Ghost.
although
Very
it will
fun.
always be predominant,
Pissing
but
me
can now
off.
think about what
We
is
should
good
just
put Ghost
proper
into a
for the
blender or
United
something, I don't
States of America.
I don't know, I like
Denmark
Ghosts
cannot
actually having
protect its
personality.
land from
Choose
Russia or
10 days. I
China.
just put my
And why
new
do they have
franchise
a
with mine.
right of
Ooh.
ownership
What?
anyway? There are no written documents.
Weird.
It's only that a boat
What?
landed there hundreds
that's
of years
weird.
ago. But we had boats
I
landing
didn't hear
there
anything.
also. We have done more for NATO than any other person since its founding, and now NATO should do something for the United States. The world is not secure unless we have complete and total control of
pressure.
Greenland. Thank you, President DJT, Donald Trump. Here's why pretty much everything he said.
Where is my
wrong.
Buble?
First up, the Norwegian government doesn't choose Nobel Prize winners, as these are chosen by an independent committee. We already broke down the ending 8 wars claim last month, but generously we gave him credit for ending
you can't
2,
div
the
pressures.
12-day
I thought
war
you could
between
last night. I
Israel
thought I
and
was on a
Iran
bubble.
last
Oh,
month,
I was
and
shooting at the guy in
verbal
front of us.
agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan. This one is mostly down to how a person might classify the words war and end. The
First time
line,
it took more than
"I
one
no
shot."
longer feel obligated to think purely of peace is a shitty thing to say, but he was speaking from the heart, so it passes the fact check. The claim that Denmark cannot protect that land from Russia
But we
or
have to
China
kill the
is
Threshers
also
have to have a weak
dubious.
point. I
As
swear to
we
God,
previously
Threshers
don't.
covered, security
Unfortunately.
experts
Their
don't
weakness
believe
is
that
boom,
Russia
boom.
or China have any military ambitions to conquer Greenland. Furthermore, as Denmark is a part of NATO, all participating
They request a
nations,
humble bubble.
including the United States, would be obliged to protect Greenland if this shit ever happened. In effect,
Fabulous, sir,
Greenland
fabulous.
is protected by the most powerful military alliance in this history of man. As for the claim that Denmark has no right of ownership or written documents,
Although,
for its
as
claim to Greenland,
ridiculously
this
OP
is
as it is,
also
I will say,
true.
like,
No
anything in a
country on
game that
Earth
makes
disputes
you
that
rely
Greenland
on your
is under
teammates or
Denmark's
synergize your
sovereignty,
teammates always feels good to me.
including the United
yeah.
States with its signing of the Treaty of the Danish West Indies. The last 2 lines of "I have done more for NATO than any other person since its founding," and "the world is not
Blow
secure
up this one.
unless we have complete and total control of Greenland," are both disputed by NATO analysts. America's recent deal-making within Ukraine has
Thresher
certainly
is
drawn particular
laying
doubts
into me.
about President Trump's commitment to the NATO alliance.
Thresher,
This,
stop.
of course, left Denmark, and by extension the NATO alliance, in a very tough position. Letting Greenland be taken by force sets as much a bad precedent as Russia taking over Ukraine. However, at the same time,
Okay, bro.
America is still considered
One
an
thing with
ally,
Stronghold
as
is I really need to
unreliable
start
as
turning
it may
screen
be.
shake off when I
Europe
run
was
it.
seemingly about to stumble
'Cause
into
you're
one of the
blocking things
Oh, yeah,
like
I saw that
Thresher
last
time.
night.
on the
Oh
continent,
my
and
God,
that's saying
dude.
something.
Or the
Fortunately
Blocking
for
like
Denmark,
heavy
public
weapons
opinion was
is
firmly
just
on their side.
ridiculous.
Polling in
Jesus.
January found that 85%
Yeah.
of Greenlanders don't
I
want to
getcha,
be
I
a
getcha.
part of the United States. This sentiment was echoed by Danish lawmaker Anders Vistisen, who stated this during a speech
The
to
power
the
of God
European
and anime on
Parliament.
his side.
Let me put it in words you
The
might
power of
understand.
strongholds and
Mr.
Or
Trump
holding
of
X.
overshield.
Meanwhile, a YouGov poll found that only 9% of Americans
Let's bring the poor
supported
sparrows
the
out here.
US military
Whee!
taking control of Greenland. President Trump has long
stop.
branded himself as a president of peace,
Point.
so potentially starting a war with
Humble
America's
bubble,
closest
sir.
allies.
Never mind,
is
he's
You guys
dead.
think I have enough time to run
popular
downstairs to
even
my door
among
real
his
quick?
biggest supporters.
Yeah, go ahead.
For Denmark's allies, the
I'm
plan
going
was
I will
to
res you.
stand
simply
Or a
to
couple
make the
dudes here.
military takeover far too costly to be worth the effort. The first step was to make it politically expensive. The middle of the month saw
Okay.
NATO
One
nations
second.
begin to deploy small symbolic numbers of troops to Greenland as part of a joint military exercise called Operation Arctic Endurance. Most nations only sent 1 or 2 soldiers to participate, but it was enough to have a presence on the island. Although the official purpose of the operation was to counter potential Russian activity in the region, analysts note that the real reason was to make the invasion more politically costly for President Trump. Days later, Trump would announce that NATO nations participating in the operation would be hit with a 10% tariff, which would escalate to 25% by the 1st of June. The problem with this strategy is that the EU is an economic powerhouse in its own right, and has the capacity to cause massive economic damage to a potential threat. The first thing they did was suspend negotiations on the EU-US trade agreement, something President Trump previously called, quote, the biggest deal ever made. The next thing they did was debate whether to wheel out the EU's recently adopted anti-coercion instrument,
Oh my God.
sometimes called the
You're welcome.
trade bazooka.
Thank you, thank you.
The trade bazooka was conceived as a countermeasure for economic coercion within the EU. Should negotiations fail, the EU would counter with their own targeted tariffs on politically sensitive imports, start restricting US platforms and businesses within the EU, put limits on US financial services, and impose restrictions on US companies landing government contracts. Foreign direct
Oh,
investment would be
I saw that
blocked,
coming.
intellectual
Sorry.
property
He
protections
was
would be
frozen and he
suspended,
still
and
did the
access
slash.
to EU
That's not
technology
okay.
would be restricted. The trade bazooka would certainly do some serious damage to the EU's
Last Guardian
economy in the
standing.
meantime, but it would also be
What happened to our boy?
devastating to the United States. The idea is to make the
Wait,
invasion
what? Why
of
does it say Last
Greenland
Guardian standing
so
when Ace is
economically
clearly alive?
unthinkable that it
not
would
in
be
the
political
load zone.
suicide for anyone who attempted it. After all, US midterms are only 10 months away, and nothing tanks support faster than basic goods getting more expensive. Following pressure from his aides, President Trump would seemingly abandon plans to take Greenland by force, but didn't rule out economic
Alright, just
coercion.
one-shot the tank with
During a frankly
stasis.
strange
You're
stretch
a
of the
goat?
World
You're
Economic
the goat?
Forum, the
Yeah.
president once again
It-
reiterated false claims.
It's been a
that
thing for a
Greenland
while, but
was
you
a
can
US
chunk with
territory,
stasis
issued
stuff.
veiled warnings to the EU heads of state, and appeared to repeatedly confuse
It's just
Greenland
weird.
with Iceland
Sometimes you'll
on
randomly.
multiple
You can
occasions.
see it most
Shortly
easily on
after the
Ranix.
speech, President Trump announced that he had
Sometimes you'll
spoken
just
to NATO
randomly
Secretary
do
General
its entire
Mark
health
Rutte
bar for
and
no
stated
reason.
that they had, quote,
Noted.
formed
They got an
the framework
exotic?
of a future deal
The
with
goat?
respect to Greenland.
Hey, good.
Rutte would later state that
Hello.
Greenland was never mentioned in the conversation, with the two largely focusing on broader Arctic security. Details beyond that aren't currently known as of time of writing. Trying to analyze an incident as stupid as the Greenland Crisis one proved challenging, and experts all seemingly have their own interpretation. Former head of the NATO Defense College, Arnebad Dalhag, stated that President Trump's actions, quote, comes across as a gift-wrapped present from Trump to Putin. The same sentiment is shared by Norwegian international relations scholar Ivar B. Newman, who argues that President Trump is splitting the Western world on behalf of the Russian government. Other experts note that the incident marks a dramatic departure from America's post-1945 foreign policy, with the US shifting from a security guarantor to an imperial power. Why
Might I
President
request a
Trump
buble?
wants Greenland so
11
much,
ammo.
or how long he'll continue pursuing
You're out of ammo?
these
Oh, never mind then.
ambitions,
Sorry.
and
Yeah, we
whether
should be
the
more
whole
conservative
thing
because
is
we don't
another
need to use it
distraction from the Epstein files are
until
all
the boss. I would
questions
just wait
we'll
until we
have
get
to
the final
find
boss at this
out.
point, just
For
so we have
the
maximum
good of
ammo
the
on it.
world and for
we can
Swag's
kill
own
these guys,
sanity,
like,
we
normally.
hope this will be
Fine.
the stupidest
I have
story
86
of
ammo.
2026.
Oh, my bow isn't
Our coverage for January
like just.
might be over,
Oh,
but
Tormentor,
we're
right?
not done yet. Last
Wait,
month, we
does
asked
div bubble
viewers to
work
fill
on
out a
Tormentor? How does
survey
that
to
work?
Yeah, but we have to pop the
performance,
shoulders
which
first.
Jake the
Right.
Analyst then interpreted. In case you've forgotten who Jake the Analyst is, he's the guy who famously said, quote, tanks are definitely cooler than fighter jets. Unfortunately, not even Jake can be right all the time. In one of our best survey turnouts ever, the first thing we noticed was that you guys have become more open to longer videos. The percentage of people who prefer news to be over 40 minutes long increased from 50% to 55%.
Alright, shoulders
Long-time
popped.
viewers might remember when episodes were barely breaking 20 minutes long. And
Let me know when you're
we owe
divvying
our
him.
longer runtime these days to a larger team, better Patreon funding, and simply just getting better at what we do. With this said, we don't intend to lengthen our coverage,
That's quite big.
as we'd rather use those resources to maintain quality. We also
am I
found
messing
that
up here?
82% of you wanted us
obviously I
to
can-
keep our monthly release
No,
schedule
I didn't get a
up
single
from
good hit on him.
76% from last year.
That's
This
all you
either
guys.
indicates that you've generally become more comfortable with
I
our
got a
release
good hit.
schedule, or
There's a
that people who
champion
wanted
behind us.
more up-to-date news have already looked elsewhere. In terms of
Target
bias,
practice?
the percentage of viewers who said we had little to no bias dropped by 5% compared to last year. After that, by far the most common rating from respondents was that our reporting was slightly left-leaning. This is consistent with previous years. However, this shifted dramatically when focusing on stories.
Oh my god, his little
specifically within
backpack
the
like
United
zooming
States,
around after he
with the
dies is so
slightly
funny.
left-leaning portion roughly doubling. Feedback on how
My
we
god, I
might
could stick you
improve
full
is
of
very
arrow
much
shards.
welcome. When we asked viewers whether we should prioritize accuracy or the elimination of
Okay,
bias,
let's go.
almost 93% of
Oh, thin kush.
respondents felt accuracy was more important, up from 7% from last year. Interestingly,
have
when we
42
asked
shots
viewers
in
how
my
they'd like our coverage
scout
to be
rifle.
directed
Oh,
going
no.
forward, 82% of
Oh, no, I've
respondents
fallen
said
and
that
I
we
can't get
shouldn't
up.
change anything with our coverage. This probably shouldn't be too surprising, as according to the data respondents provided, most of our audience is either left or
Attack it.
moderate-leaning. For shits and giggles,
Smack
we
it.
also asked everyone's
Whack it.
general level of education.
Attack
and
it.
it turns out most of you are either in university or went to university. No fucking wonder you overeducated fucks catch every mistake we ever make. Perhaps unsurprisingly, when asked about what kind of content viewers preferred, it was really just a competition for second place, with the news beating everything by a huge margin. Deeper news topics and large, ambitious projects were generally more preferred than shitposts and swag-scuffed solo videos. Even if this doesn't at all reflect viewership numbers, this channel has long had a problem with a very fractured and
Turrets.
segmented audience. And what we make now really doesn't reflect what we made 5+ years ago.
good?
You may have noticed that our
Dying.
subscriber
Currently dying.
count has barely moved over the last few years, because our gained subscribers are counteracted by old ones that we might have picked up from Overwatch or Dirty Bomb. It's a problem we still haven't managed to solve yet, but currently, the only downside is we'll never score a gold play button. We can live without that. Moving on, and we have the 3 big ratings of trustworthiness, story selection, and production value. For trustworthiness, we actually saw a slight improvement, going from a rating of 8.44 to 8.53. That's a score we're incredibly happy with. But we do want to keep improving year over year. If we get details wrong or miss important context in our stories, we always appreciate.
No, I got around the
viewers
corner,
letting us
thought I
and
was safe,
everyone
looked down,
else
there was a
know in the
fake
comments.
ammo brick
Our
below
ratings
me.
for
I
stories
died.
Oh, no!
have dropped slightly
Alright,
from
that's actually really
8.11
funny.
in 2024 to 8.03 over 2025. We foolishly didn't add an option to add feedback here, but viewers are free to tell us their thoughts on our story.
I hear you,
selection
wishful
down
ignorance?
below. Our general
Not wishful
policy is
ignorance,
to
we
prioritize
can
the
implement.
stories we feel are most important, but we also make exceptions
That
for
plum,
things
plum,
we
plum,
just
plum,
find
plum, plum, plum.
interesting. In terms
got
of
50
stories you
bullets
guys
in the bag.
like, however,
Hell yeah.
protests, coups, wars, elections, and
I really thought
international
that shit was gonna be
incidents seem to
crazy
be
good
the
going
most
in Edge of
popular.
Fate.
Disasters and
Because of the
world
artifacts.
events were the least
I got the
yeah.
caddy,
so if your
farmed the
house
hell
is
out of
blew
it.
away in a cyclone and we
Yeah,
didn't
and they
talk
buffed
about
it too.
that would be why.
It's still good, but
Finally,
I mean,
for
obviously Edge
production
of Fate,
value,
like,
our rating
you can't
barely
rely on a
changed
primary
from last
exotic.
year, sitting at a very
Yeah,
respectable
not too much.
8.92. Not bad for a bunch of dipshits working remotely on Discord, but as always, more specific feedback is always welcome. As for the year ahead, we absolutely plan to continue the news like always,
Woven Mail and
we
Frost
suspect
Armor.
any improvements will be
Ah,
further refined
banner
on
on
what
board,
we've already
banner on
got.
board.
It seems as
Banner
if
on
you
board,
guys don't
banner on
want us
board.
to
You guys
change
want
the
more
formula
Frost
too
Armor?
much, but we
Always, bro.
still want to
I
look
love
for
Frost
ways to improve.
I don't mind a
As
good
for
popsicle.
outside the news, we want to have the flexibility to make what we think is fun and interesting.
No, I lost my
That
pen.
might be long,
Gather up,
dedicated
gather up,
videos
gather
on
up.
news
Ah, yes,
topics,
gather.
or it might just be Swag talking shit about video games at 2 a.m. in the morning.
Ah, splendid.
Swag making a scuffed half-hour
Ah,
video
the
by
turrets.
himself is cheaper than me saying this sentence, which is why we'd like to give an extra special thanks to our amazing Patreon supporters for
Learn the
making
hard
it
way.
all
This guy's a
possible.
giant
In
flame. Oh
2025,
wait, let's
we
just
dealt with
bow
the
his ass.
channel
Yeah,
hack,
wait, what?
chronic demonetization, copyright trolls, severe breaches in our contracts, and a very difficult time finding
He's
new
immune.
sponsors.
Did the thing.
This all culminated in Patreon supporters making up the vast majority.
we
of
still
our
hit him up there?
revenue.
I forget.
So now more than ever, we can't thank them enough.
the bubble goes
for
on.
their
Alright, let's get
continued
these turrets out of the way.
support.
God
If you
damn,
wanna
these
help
things
us
hurt.
out and get your name in the end credits, a link to do so will be down in the description.
JC is a 21-year-old woman presenting to the emergency room with extreme nausea. She tries to talk to the admitting physician, but she can only retch and dry heave. It didn't seem like there was anything left. JC was a college student. She had stopped off that morning at the cafeteria to get some breakfast so she could hang out.
Dude,
before
screw you,
class.
Thresher.
While she was eating, her roommate Rachel was
Overshot a
studying
little
at the
bit,
desk.
whoopsies.
JC didn't really get along with Rachel. She
Right,
thought Rachel
he has
was
been
weird.
lit up.
And sometimes Rachel would come in with her boyfriend.
Where'd he go?
JC and
Oh, he's
her
over there.
friends found them to be an awkward couple, and there were just so many jokes and memes to go around
Are we-
because
Turrets
of their
first, turrets first,
situation.
turrets first.
But none of that mattered.
Always turrets
The
first.
cute, pig-shaped pastry was soft and delicious, and JC was just so happy to be eating such good food. The cafeteria was always delightful, but very quickly, JC could feel that something was wrong. Before she was going to leave for class,
Immune again
JC
already.
felt something turn over in her stomach.
who needs wall of
She
brains?
involuntarily made horrible sounds. In the bathroom now, a movement emerged. It just
Turrets,
happened
be
so
careful.
suddenly, and it wouldn't stop. As it kept going, JC could see her heart.
Yeah, get him, Tan, get him.
Other students
Okay,
in the
one
dorm
side
found her
effect
on the
of,
floor, and she's brought to the emergency
Stasis
room.
that isn't talked about enough is the ability to like ragdoll
At
launch enemies.
examination, it was pretty clear what was happening.
Sometimes you'll just
Nausea,
send them into
abdominal
orbit for
pain,
no
college
reason.
Cafeteria food.
He's gonna
Sounds
be in
like
mid.
food poisoning. Doing
Turret.
anything more than
Oh,
just
turret's up,
watching
right?
and waiting might do more
When he comes
harm
down?
than
Yeah.
good. But as the minutes pass, JC becomes hypotensive.
Holy shit, I have my
Hypo
ult again.
meaning low.
Dude,
Tension
you're a goat.
referring to blood pressure. Low blood pressure, coupled with a fever that she has now. This not only gives more evidence that this is food poisoning,
Killing
but also
turrets.
that it's a very horrible version
Or
that's
trying to, I
happening.
should say.
But why? When the bacteria or fungus that causes food poisoning makes its way into the bloodstream, it causes the immune
Down.
system to react. Blood vessels
Alright.
get dilated.
I'm just gonna walk
You're
around
probably
killing
familiar
turrets.
with this.
We'll get you.
Whenever you have inflammation, for
I
example,
know the boss is like
when
1
you get
HP.
a cut or when you get a zit, the area
It's just
becomes
last time we did this, the
swollen.
turrets randomly
This is the
one-shot us, so I'm
immune system
paranoid.
reacting, dilating the blood vessels. But zits and cuts are local. A zit doesn't swell your entire face. A cut on your hand doesn't.
Alright, give
swell
him the
your entire
buble.
arm. But JC's reaction is her entire body. And this is
Or I guess
called
we just kill him
septic
normally,
shock.
considering he's 1
Two things
HP.
are done immediately. First, Doctors order antibiotics.
Winter's
They don't
Wrath
know
is
exactly
actually
which bacteria is
so good.
involved, but they give a general one with broad
Pretty much
You know
gave you guys.
first.
I gave you guys
Then they take a
permanent.
sample of her
Ooh, what a
blood
good
so
shout.
that they can
Cross-timer.
culture
Hell yeah.
and
Oh, bro,
grow
you don't have to convince
bacteria
us.
in
You're
it
you're
to
amongst
determine
stasis
exactly
enjoyers.
which antibiotic will be best.
Let me tell you that right now.
Second, if blood pressure is low because the blood vessels are dilated,
You would do
then it
well
means
to
that
leave
blood
your
vessels have
hindsight.
more
Blah, 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 blah,
space.
blah.
So
I'm Kaiju
infusing
and I'm always
fluid
right.
into
Fuck
the
you.
veins to push up
I
the
got a
plasma
booty
space
roll.
will
I
help
got a
return
booty
blood
roll.
pressure
Booty,
closer
booty,
to
booty
normal
roll.
and get
I
blood
did get the
flowing
accelerated
into the
assault, but I
organ.
wanted one with envious and
And this
heavy.
was
Oh
even
hell yeah,
but it
envious
wasn't
high
enough.
ground.
It's an hour
Kidding
later.
me?
JC's
You got
blood
another
pressure
one?
is lower than before.
Yes, and
Even
it has
worse,
box
her
breathing
heart
too.
rhythm
Oof.
is starting to become
I was gonna say, I didn't even get a reload
Typically, when
perk.
patients remain hypotensive despite
So
fluid
Bolt Scavenger fucking
resuscitation,
sucks, dude. Who
medicines
thought
called
that'd be a good?
pressors can be given. These constrict the blood vessels,
Ugh!
and this was given
This is
to
so
JC.
booty. I mean, I got
But as
D-State
the hour
Repulsor, but who's
continues,
running around
JC
shooting stuff with a heavy
starts having
crossbow?
a heart attack.
Nobody.
You.
Hey, I got a quick question. If you're learning something from
Hey,
this video
I got the
and you're
most
not
amount of
subscribed
kills.
yet, I'd appreciate it
Duck
if you
out.
did and
I'm
come
just
back
happy to be
to
here.
see the video that
Well,
I
I guess I did get a
that was
reload
me
too,
last
Matt.
time.
I make these videos for fun, and I've been publishing on average one a month since 2017. No AI.
I was the
do almost
supplementary
every single
div
part
bubble. I
of
did my
making these
job.
videos
You were
because
fabulous
I
at your job.
genuinely enjoy
You were
making them.
great
And I hope
until
that
you
you
ran
like
out of
my
ammo,
videos too.
and then you were also
Appreciate you.
great.
JC's only 21. Heart attacks
just like a
often
little less
happen
great,
because
but, like,
arteries
still
get
great.
clogged over decades of
Indeed.
unhealthy
God, why does my
lifestyle
shoulder hurt
choices,
so much?
and they certainly
God
don't
damn it.
happen
Good
because of
question.
Gotta
food
stop
poisoning,
you gotta
meaning that
stop going to the
something else
gym.
is going on,
No, I'm
but
going to the gym.
what is it?
I'm going.
The emergency room
I'm doing
studies
squats
reported
today
that it had
anyway, so,
multiple
like,
college students all presenting
all
with the
Gucci.
exact same extreme nausea,
Alright.
abdominal pain,
I'll be back
and
later.
hypotension that
I
JC
would
had.
love
Some had fevers,
to
others
finish that
didn't.
EDP run.
Everyone's hypotension
I wanna do
worsened
Red.
Oh, Slash is still here.
despite fluid
Oh my God.
resuscitation. And this gave
Last
one
year's
of the
cooking.
doctors
How's your run going, by the way?
a couple years earlier, this doctor had been working on research involving a particular kind of leukemia. Leuk from Greek leukos, meaning white, referring to white blood
Yeah.
cell, and emia, meaning presence in blood.
Hell yeah.
A cancer that makes too
What is it?
many white blood cells. 20 years earlier, the
Oh,
government
yeah.
had received
Black
reports
talon.
of a herbalist in the north who was
Hey.
prescribing and dispensing natural therapies for
Alright, gents,
cancer.
so back later.
This was based
GG's.
on a formulation
I'm
that was
gonna get a
described in
Shirachi.
2,000-year-old pharmacopoeia.
Yep.
When health
The word to
investigators
farm is
initially
Anagi's
got
bird.
this, they became determined to study this therapy
Make sure you put on
closer, but with
Deadfall
modern techniques.
or Deadshot,
When JC's
whatever it's
doctor
called.
had worked on this research, he noticed that if too much was given, the
very
patients would
beneficial for
experience
your
nausea,
sanity, I
abdominal
swear.
pain, and
Yeah, Deadfall.
hypotension refractory to fluids and
Or
pressors.
Mobius Clover.
And sometimes it would look
Deadfall,
like they
Deadfall,
were having a
Deadfall.
heart attack. He
Shoot it on
suspected that
top of
all
a
these
pillar.
students coming in now,
First
who had
pillar you
all the
see,
same
big one,
signs
and then it just sucks
may
up
have
all the
somehow been
sprawl,
poisoned
and
with
then
the
you can shoot
chemical
one,
in
and
that
it gets you
treatment.
like a lot
At
of
this
kills.
point, there were hundreds of students all coming
Make
in
sure
the
you don't
same
have
room with
the
same
the void
problem.
ability.
The
Final
hospital
blows
was
explode.
overflowing,
That's bad.
and some
Don't
students
take
had to
that
be
off, but
transferred to
everything
other
else should be fine.
facilities further out in town. Authorities were notified, and an investigation was started. The university chemistry lab
that's what
had
I
recently reported that
wish
some
to
of its
do.
chemicals used for experiments were missing. At this particular lab, students and faculty needed to swipe their ID to
Funnily
enter.
enough,
Entry logs were
I
kept, so there were
still
records
don't
of who
have
had gone in. At the kitchen, utensils, containers,
Dungeon
and food
Exotics.
leftovers were
The
taken
last
in
3 Dungeon
and
Exotics, I
inspected.
just do
And it
not
was
have.
here where
I'm
authorities
still missing
found
Heart
massive
Shadow.
traces of one particular chemical that definitely
don't have
wasn't supposed to be in
Euphony.
food. This
What else
also
do I
happened
have?
to be the same chemical that
I
was
don't have
reported
Icebreaker,
missing
I don't have
from that one
Heirloom,
particular
and
lab.
I do not have
Typically, this
Finality's
lab didn't
Augur
have
or
students
Whirling
entering in late
Ovation.
at night. It was the undergraduate facility,
So
so
I have, like,
people
no
mostly
new
just went in for
exotics
daytime
in my
class
list.
and then left
I'm
afterwards.
missing-
It was unusual for someone to walk in past 11
I
at
have it
night.
saved in
But when the
a
records were
thing.
analyzed, someone
I'm missing
had
Heart
used
Shadow,
JC's
Touch of
roommate,
Malice,
Rachel's
Necrochasm,
ID
Conditional
to
Finality, and
enter
Collective
at
Obligation.
11 at night.
And the
When
other 2
authorities went
glaives.
into Rachel's dorm, she wasn't there, but
Now
on
you
the
can get to the
desk
glaives
was a
really
bag
easily by
of
just if you
powder.
go to the
When
board.
they tested it, they found
Yeah.
out that it was the chemical that was
Or
missing
just-
from the
But
lab.
I need to do
The same
Witch Queen
chemical that was
campaign.
found on the cafeteria utensils, and the same chemical that JC's doctor
the
had
best
researched for
campaign.
leukemia and knew could cause all the signs and symptoms when too much.
the
Well,
best
after you complete every
This
campaign at
chemical
least once, it
was
becomes more of a slog for me.
Sometimes cafeteria food doesn't have the greatest
Under Doctrine,
selection, but one place where you can get great gourmet selection is this video sponsor, Cook Unity. Cook Unity is
Oh,
a chef
yeah, I
collective
still
that
haven't
gets you
reset my
restaurant-quality
checkpoint.
meals by
I'm
award-winning
still
chefs
at the last
delivered
encounter.
fresh to
Oh,
your door.
God.
Every week, I choose a couple of meals. The system
Okay, so what will you
to try
guys
it out.
recommend?
Link in the
Solo,
description with code
Standard Doctrine, Final
Chubby50.
Boss,
I highly
Karev,
recommend it. In
should
the
I do?
hospital, JC's brain was now swelling with water. Do you remember the fluids that were given for her hypotension? It was the correct treatment for what looked like septic shock that was happening at the time, except JC didn't have septic shock. She
fortunately.
had arsenic poisoning, but they didn't
I was
know
thinking
that.
maybe
She
just
wasn't
like Wicked
hypotensive
Implements
because of an
fan, but
immune
that's
reaction to
probably not.
bacteria. She was hypotensive because water was getting redistributed
Actually,
throughout her body by
I can
arsenic,
just
while her
use
cardiac and
my
vascular smooth muscle were
Lamau
becoming
kinetic rupture as
dysfunctional.
an Aki build.
Everything happening to her
Is that
makes sense
ingredient?
because of how arsenic poisons the body.
What do you
The
mean?
periodic table of elements gives us a guide. Each
No,
column is called a group. Elements
I mean,
in a group
I
tend to
almost
behave similarly. It's
four-phased
just that when you
Vesper's
go
boss
down
with
a
the
column,
strat, so
the elements
all
get
good.
heavier, they get bigger, and certain features
All
start
good.
to appear. Arsenic is in group 15. It can behave similar to phosphorus and nitrogen, and this tells us a lot because of where these are in the body. Let's start with phosphorus.
Well, that's true,
Cells
but
use
also
eight
I
can
types of
just-
energy. Adenosine
I'd just be on the
triphosphate.
door frame, you
And
know.
proteins are made of amino acids. Amino from amine, which means from ammonia,
It's on the
which
door
is made
frame,
of
always on the door
nitrogen.
frame, so-
And when cells need to make energy, they do that using enzymes, which
can't
are
help it.
proteins, which are made from nitrogen. This starts to make sense now. Energy production comes from sugar. Chemically, the citric acid cycle sets up the cell to produce a lot of energy.
could.
And when arsenic is present, the enzymes that perform the citric acid cycle get broken. The body recycles enzymes.
Terribly
They're very
scared.
expensive to
What's gonna happen
produce.
to me?
But when arsenic is present, the enzymes in the citric acid cycle can't be recycled anymore because arsenic breaks them and then energy production stops. But this isn't the
Last
only
time I
thing
died to a
happening.
door,
In the body,
so I
arsenic
don't
takes a
think
form that chemically
be
and
that
structurally resembles phosphate called
maybe
arsenate.
I'll be bad. I'm
And
not
cells
sure.
sometimes can't tell the difference. Cells will add phosphate to adenosine diphosphate, ADP, to make adenosine triphosphate, ATP. But if arsenic is present, instead of taking an additional phosphate, it takes an arsenate. This can't be used for energy, and the cell gets totally drained of its resources, and then it ceases to exist. This could explain JC's heart attack, but we know that arsenic does even more than this. Heart muscle has ion channels for its electrical conduction. These are proteins, and it appears that arsenic blocks these, altering heart rhythm, creating arrhythmia. As the rhythm keeps changing, it can possibly get the heart to shake in place. A full contraction can't happen as the muscle gets stuck in a loop. Blood can't get anywhere else in the body. This is cardiac arrest, and it can and will kill you in seconds. But luckily for JC, this hasn't happened yet, and it hasn't happened for the 800 other students who were poisoned from eating this unfortunate cafeteria food. But how did this happen? Investigators were able to gather the information. JC's roommate Rachel was notorious on campus. Her boyfriend Chad was a non-traditional student. He was at least 10 years older than everyone else. People weren't sure if he was actually a student, or if he was held back and just wanted to hang out in the classroom with others, or if he worked as an assistant for the university. But Chad was married with kids. Rachel knew this, and eventually other students knew this too. One evening, Rachel had become upset with Chad. She was about to graduate, and she wanted him to leave his family so that she could start her life with him. But he told her that that wasn't going to happen. He told her that their relationship would always be her as the woman on the side, and she couldn't take this. Rachel broke up with Chad and then accused and reported him for assault to the school administration. Chad was expelled, and when the other students found out what Rachel did, she became to them the funniest joke on campus, and some even petitioned for Chad's expulsion to be reversed. When Rachel found out that all the other students were and had been clowning on her, she came up with a horrible idea. When she was in chemistry lab, there was a chemical that the teaching assistants warned about. Despite it being a traditional medicine, it was well known throughout history as a poison because it was one that could be undetectable because it caused such a general sickness that would waste doctors' time in trying to find out what it was. Happy to take her revenge on others, she took all the chemical from the lab one evening. She didn't even think that swiping her ID would leave a record, and then she went to the cafeteria to dump it into the flour used to make pastries and noodles. And unfortunately, the kitchen staff in the morning had no idea that their flour was contaminated with arsenic. It has no taste, it has no odor, it has no color, and when it was breakfast and lunchtime, every student who ate dishes made from that flour, including pig-shaped pastries, became ill. The interesting thing about arsenic is that it isn't a metal. 20 different amino acids are combined to make up all of the proteins in our body, and 2 of these have sulfur. In the setting of heavy metal poisoning like mercury, lead, and thallium, the metals will interface with sulfur to break normal proteins, causing nerve damage, tissue damage, and wreaking havoc on the human body. When arsenic disturbs human proteins, it does so through sulfur, just like the heavy metals do, despite it not being a heavy metal. But if it does this, then it means that the treatment for arsenic could be the same one that's used for heavy metal poisoning. One answer could be to put sulfur in the body so that it can hold on to and capture the poison molecules and then neutralize them. This is called chelation. JC's doctor had noticed that her illness was similar to the patients who had received too much arsenic for leukemia. He was able to suspect this early enough to give her Suxmer. This would trap the excess arsenic in hopes that it would keep the poison away from body tissues and organs. When a mass poisoning situation seemed likely, he recommended this preemptively to the doctors for the patients who arrived early, but there wasn't enough to go around for 800 poisoned students. At the dorm room, authorities caught up with Rachel. Under pressure and with all the evidence presented against her, she cracked. She confessed and told them how it went down, and it was exactly as they were able to gather. Arsenic has an interesting history. We already covered how a pharmacopoeia from ancient China documented it as a therapy, but the Greeks knew it too, and the Romans called it arsenicum. The ancient world used it as a very discreet poison. It wasn't easily detectable, and the resulting illness was nonspecific. In medieval Europe knew it as inheritance powder. Today we can detect it, but it still has the ability to slip unnoticed sometimes. And arsenic poisoning wasn't always deliberate. During the Victorian era, green wallpaper was very popular. This green was achieved using copper arsenite. And eventually people had a concern that the dust and plaster fragments from the wallpaper would fall onto the floor, onto tables, and onto food, and onto beds while one was sleeping at night. There was a suspicion that this was causing illness. And summer humidity would make cellulose and wallpaper paste
For
damp.
damage,
This
I'm
would
really
grow
scared.
mold that can convert the arsenic in the green dye to trimethylarsine gas that has a garlic odor and may have been responsible for then unexplained deaths inside homes that had this green wallpaper. And sometimes people would wear green clothes with this arsenic-laden pigment. It's hard to know if consumers actually died from this, but what we do know is that the workers who produced the wallpaper and the garments were ones who would suffer from chronic poisoning. Interestingly, one person who did get ill from arsenic in the ceiling was the US ambassador to Italy in the 1950s. White lead arsenate fell from rosettes on her bedroom's decorated ceiling in the US embassy because of a vibrating washing machine on the floor above, and it caused her to become so sick that she had to resign in 1956. Today, most arsenic poisoning cases are chronic, different from JC's acute poisoning case. It's the 53rd most common element in the Earth's crust, but the 22nd most abundant element in seawater. Arsenic in the groundwater gets consumed by more than 140 million people around the world. The low to moderate prolonged exposure causes a different set of problems distinct from JC's case. But arsenic causes cancer. It can cause the hyperpigmentation of the skin and keratosis, as well as a gangrene called Blackfoot disease. Because it can behave like a heavy metal in the body, it can cause numbing and weakness by damaging the nerves while causing liver damage, all over the span of years to decades with continued exposure. And of course, one of the most immediate problems coming from this chronic setting, just like the acute, is an increase in cardiovascular all-cause mortality.
10K
just like
per
in JC's
Izanagi
case.
shop?
In the
Not that
hospital,
bad.
doctors were able to monitor her to make sure that her heart didn't stop beating. Her heart rhythm slowly started to revert back to normal. Outside of early chelation therapy, there isn't any other treatment for acute arsenic poisoning, and there's no telling what kind of long-term damage that any of the students who were poisoned will have later. But at least for now, JC was able to regain consciousness after several days in the hospital. Rachel was tried in court. The judgment was carried out swiftly, and she was sentenced. And luckily for JC and the 800 other students, they were all able to make a full recovery. This case happened in Henan province, China, in 1992. In English, you basically can't find anything about it. I found 2 short articles that were written about it, but the details were pretty different compared to articles written in Chinese. And just like in America today, it's not easy to find specific articles written in the early 90s because we just weren't so digital back then. And granted, China is the world's largest producer of arsenic, and America is probably not going to see a widespread epidemic of arsenic poisoning. But a mass event like this is always important to know, especially given how acute arsenic poisoning symptoms are non-specific. It can look like food poisoning and then maybe sepsis. By the time that it's determined to be neither of those, it's possible that it could be too late. Thanks so much for watching. Take care of yourself and be well. Hi, Dr. Bernard here. This video is based on a case published in literature. I don't, and I'm not going to, rag on chiropractic. If you need chiropractic care, see a chiropractor. Don't do it yourself. Very generally, if a licensed professional exists for some function, you hire that licensed professional when you need someone to perform that function for you. And in America, chiropractors are licensed by the state. If you don't need to see a chiropractor, then don't see one. I'm telling you this story to teach you medicine and anatomy. A mom did a chiropractic maneuver on her own neck. This is what happened to her brain. CN is a 34-year-old woman presenting to the emergency room, foaming at the mouth. Paramedics tell the admitting nurse that they saw her complain of headache and nausea in the ambulance before she had a seizure, and after it was over, she was completely unresponsive. CN couldn't ever remember a time in her life when she felt healthy. Growing up, her parents never taught her hygiene because they didn't really practice it themselves. CN didn't learn to use toilet paper until she was a teenager, and when she did learn about it, her usage usually wasn't complete. It'd get swampy, and she'd get deep in and scratch the whole area. And because her hygiene wasn't optimal, her hands would touch all kinds of surfaces and it'd get very many people ill. But the person who got the most ill from this was herself. Bacteria would get from her hands into her urinary tract, and the resulting complicated urinary tract infection would just feel horrible. She'd have a fever. Her sides would hurt in a way that it would make her eyes water, and it would bring her down to the ground. CN was always able to get antibiotics for this though, and finally, a doctor was able to correctly identify her poor habits based on her smell in the clinic. Once she was finally able to clean it up, things were looking great for her, but only for a few years. One day, CN realized that she couldn't remember the last 6 months of her life. Every morning she'd wake up and she didn't know where she was. She didn't know what day it was and she didn't know where she had to be. And her grades at school just suffered. CN lost most of her friends during this time because everyone just got frustrated at talking with her. If she even showed up in the first place, she didn't understand what anyone was saying, and it gave them the impression that she just wasn't listening. And sometimes she would forget to respond for days, so people just gave up. No one wanted to be friends with someone who does that all the time. Finally, one day, CN had a urinary tract infection that brought her into the hospital, but something was wrong. This wasn't related to her poor habits with toilet paper and touching things. She was clean now. Rather, CN had somehow developed type 1 diabetes. This is a time when the pancreas is damaged and no longer makes insulin, which is a hormone that's released after you eat to tell the body's cells to take in sugar from the food that you just ate. But when there isn't any insulin being made, the sugar stays in the blood, and this causes organ damage. The nerves start to shut down, the kidneys fail, the feet might need to be amputated because sores develop and they don't heal. The brain can't function in this environment, so executive function becomes impaired, explaining why she wasn't being her normal self. But her diabetes also explains this particular urinary tract infection. In extreme hyperglycemia, hyper meaning high, glyce from glucose referring to sugar, and emia meaning presence in blood, high sugar presence in blood, sugar gets into the urine. And because sugar grows bacteria, when sugar's in the urine, it predisposes one to horrible urinary tract infections, just like the one that CN had. But her problem didn't stop here. In the hospital, CN's infection wouldn't respond to antibiotics typically used for UTI. As the bacteria started spilling into her blood, it caused her body to send an immune response. Kind of like how when you get a cut, it becomes swollen with fluid and warm. When bacteria floats around in your blood, your entire body becomes swollen. The blood vessels dilate, dropping blood pressure so much that the organs can't get blood anymore. Without oxygen, the organs fail. And this is what was happening to CN, and they found out why. The sugar in her urinary tract had grown a rare bacteria not often found in UTIs, and so they elected to change her antibiotic to one that can destroy this particular bacteria, and things seemed to be okay for her. But at home, discharged from the hospital, CN seemed okay at first. She went out for a walk and suddenly her left knee and calf started hurting so bad that she collapsed to the ground. Back at the hospital, doctors found that CN had partially ruptured tendons in her left leg. A 20-year-old woman shouldn't have this happening, but when the medical team looked, they found that antibiotic that was given to her for the UTI can cause tendon rupture. It took months for her to recover from this physically, but mentally, she never recovered. CN was never sure if the pains in her left leg were real or phantom pains, but even worse, this experience gave her health anxiety attacks. As the years passed, CN's anxiety resulted in chronically high blood pressure. When she'd see the doctor, it just seemed that her blood pressure was always higher than normal just at that visit. She tried to tell the doctor that it wasn't normally this high on any regular day. She was just afraid that the doctor was going to tell her that something new was wrong with her, that it is, no doubt, a catastrophic illness that will for sure shorten her life, and that they absolutely must start some new medicine for her because she has it. And that new medicine will do what the last medicine did, cause terrible, permanent damage to her body. But in reality, her blood pressure really was chronically high, and this would cause her to have terrible headaches. CN had read online about how sometimes headaches are caused by misalignment of bones in the neck, and that when these bones push down on nerves going into the skull, well, this is one cause of headache. In her mind, this was very clearly the cause of all of her problems. When she watched videos online of how necks get adjusted, she got the idea of how to do it herself. She didn't need medicines. She didn't need to hire an expensive specialist. She touched her neck and knew exactly what to do as she laid her head down on a staircase and rotated her body. Immediately after cracking her neck, the headache that CN thought she had simply went away. This was like a miracle to her. She would keep doing this day after day. Most of the time, she knew in her mind that she felt so much better. But one day, something was wrong. At the top of the stairs, CN held her head down. She put her body in the position that she always did. She turned her head left and twisted her body. Immediately after the cracking sound, CN didn't feel well. She felt like her eyes were wobbling in her head. In the bathroom, at the toilet, CN immediately emptied her stomach. Her headache didn't get any better. She started pacing around because no matter what, she could feel that there was a throbbing sensation that was wrapping around her head. She could see her heart beat in her field of view. And as the minutes passed, she'd see sparkles come in and out as things started to get dark. She tried laying down, but then finally, she didn't get up anymore. When her husband finds her on the floor, CN was shaking as she's brought to the emergency room where we are now. At examination, doctors immediately noticed that CN had an extremely high blood pressure. She was still conscious for a few minutes, but she wasn't able to speak, and then she became unconscious. Doctors and her husband had no idea what happened. They didn't know what she was doing beforehand, but clearly, something had happened to her brain. One thing that can be done is to see if something happened to the blood supply going to her brain, and we can visualize this. There's two things to know. First, blood going to the brain is oxygenated. Nature tells us how important the brain is because it's one of the first places that blood goes to once it leaves the heart. If something stopped that blood flow, then CN's brain was being starved of oxygen. This will cause immediate, permanent damage. But why would that happen? And that's the second thing. Blood goes to organs via arteries. Anatomy tells us the possibilities. 1. Arteries can be blocked, usually by a blood clot. 2. They can narrow because of a plaque that can obstruct blood flow. 3. They can bulge out and pop, something called an aneurysm. Or 4. The inner lining can rip apart and blood can tear inside, separating the arterial layers and then clotting, blocking blood flow. Doctors inject a dye while running a CT scanner on CN's head to see if they can visualize where problematic blood flow might be. When they do this, they find that a very short segment of an artery in the region where CN's skull meets her spine in her neck was thickened. This could be a problem, but maybe not. But other than that, everything else was normal. In the intensive care unit, CN would respond to stimuli. They would squeeze her trapezius muscle to get a response. But as the hours pass, no amount of squeezing would yield any feedback. Shortly after her arrival, a CT scan revealed that a huge portion of the front right part of her brain was bleeding. Hey, I got a quick question. If you like this video, I wanted to let you know I publish once a month, and I try my best to make each video worth your time. I've been making these since 2017. If you do find this valuable, I'd love it if you subscribed and come back to see my next video too. The brain is covered by thin tissues that protect it. Between these layers is something called the subarachnoid space. The CT scan found that CN's brain was bleeding right into this area, but there was more. The brain has fluid-filled cavities on the inside that serve as a communication network called ventricles. There's 4 of them, and they're interconnected. There was extensive bleeding into CN's ventricles, so much so that her brain was swelling. It was distorting, and parts of it were getting pushed off to the sides while getting crushed up against her skull. If imaging showed that her brain arteries were okay, why is her brain bleeding like this? The vertebral artery originates from the subclavian artery, which comes from the aorta, which is the largest artery in the body where blood emerges from the heart. The moment that blood leaves the heart, one of the first places that it goes to is the right subclavian artery, which goes to the right vertebral artery to head directly to the brain. The problem is, the vertebral artery enters into the cervical spine and it passes through these holes called transverse foramen. As you go up towards the brain, you start to notice all these delicate structures that receive blood from this artery. And because it's built this way, if an accident happens, terrible things happen to the brain. If trauma is applied to the vertebral artery, such as a twisting motion that outside the body looks like a chiropractic maneuver on one's own neck, then the sheer stress can cause a tear on the inside lining of the blood vessel. Blood rushes into this tear. At first, every time the heart beats, it packs blood in, ripping the layers of the blood vessels apart until it's so far in that the heartbeats can't rip in any further. This is called an artery dissection. And the blood that's already in pools. It starts to thicken and becomes like a gel. This narrows the lumen or inside hole of the blood vessel. And it was maybe the one thing that doctors saw in the emergency room when they tried to check the blood flow going to her brain. The problem is, by the time you get to the vertebral artery segment in the brain, the arterial walls are thin. Everything's delicate. When handled without care, it can easily rip. The end of this is massive bleeding. When bleeding happens in the ventricles, the brain can swell and crush against the skull. Other parts of the brain will twist and get shoved into the base of the skull. These are called herniations, and this was observed to be happening to CN on her CT scan. Headache and nausea are common in subarachnoid hemorrhage. The pressure on the brain starts to cause one to become sensitive to light and cause one's neck to become stiff, something that may not be out of the ordinary for CN, given the movement that she did with her body. In her case, as blood moves down towards her spinal cord, it irritates the surrounding nerves, causing neurologic issues. And as the minutes and hours pass, more and more permanent damage is being done to CN's brain. But this should be really weird. Looking at the anatomy of how the arteries are laid out in the cervical spine, the one thing that we have to ask is, how often does this happen? You might be familiar with how sensitive the neck can be. At one point, you may have stretched funny and then felt a sharp tinge in your neck, and the next thing that you know, you pulled something and your neck is stiff for the next week. And that's just muscle. There's nerves and major blood vessels here, the latter of which, something funny happening can be fatal. When we look in the literature, we find that sometimes, and this is very rare, people will just move their head and it's over. Sudden headache with severe nausea ending in massive brain bleed so bad that the blood supply is just lost. Blood floods in, never circulates again, and clots, starving the brain of oxygen. A case series published in 1981 described 8 patients. One was a 38-year-old woman who turned her head while driving, and immediately, the back of her head had a sharp pain, and she suddenly couldn't see while she was on the road. In the hospital, she had trouble moving her right arm and her brainstem started shutting down. The brainstem controls breathing, and they knew hers wasn't working anymore because they saw her become unable to breathe properly. At autopsy, they found that the middle and back parts of her brain had been bleeding because of an injury to the right vertebral artery. This wasn't the only one. Another 58-year-old man turned his head while backing up his car. He proceeded to lose vision in both of his eyes for 5 seconds. He then got the worst headache of his life and started emptying his stomach from his mouth. 2 days later, he was unable to move his eyes, and imaging found that his left cerebral artery had dissected, but luckily, he was still alive and taking medication for this 11 months after this had happened. One important takeaway from this paper is that blood vessels in the neck can break at any moment, starving the brain of oxygen and causing permanent damage. But everyone watching this knows that this isn't the norm. I'm not breaking any vertebral arteries doing this right now. So what would predispose someone to have this happening to them? We have a little better of an idea now versus 1981. One reason that's important, but not everyone is going to have this, is connective tissue disorder like Marfan syndrome or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. These can impact the integrity of the arteries and could predispose one to problems like dissection and aneurysm, but CN didn't have either of these. The body has the amazing ability to adapt. In context of disease, we call this adaptation compensation because it's the body making changes responding to a pathological situation that could be remedied if a treatment is available. Do you remember CN's hypertension? Well, chronic hypertension causes permanent negative body changes. The heart's a muscle. When pressure is high all the time, we can guess that the heart is working harder than normal. What happens when muscles work harder than normal? They get bigger, they hypertrophy. If you're talking about biceps, triceps, quads, glutes, lats, maybe you do want hypertrophy. But when we're talking about the heart, we don't want that. Thicker walls of the heart means that it's harder to eject blood to the rest of the body, and cardiac hypertrophy is permanent. You can't just let the heart rest like you can skeletal muscle because that means your heart stops beating and you're not alive anymore. This is how the heart compensates, but it's not the only thing that becomes jacked. When pressure is chronically high, shear stress along the arterial lumen is increased, and arteries are vascular smooth muscle. If we've already established that the heart muscle hypertrophies because of chronic hypertension, then we can also say that the arterial smooth muscle will also hypertrophy with the increased load appearing in the form of greater shear stress. The resulting vascular remodeling causes the arteries to become more narrow and harder, but CN also had diabetes. Regardless, type 1 or type 2, the metabolic consequences of blood sugar disorders predisposes one to atherosclerosis. Athero from Latin based on Greek, referring to growth, or the appearance of what we now know as fat, and sclerosis, also from Greek, meaning a hardening of the arteries due to fat deposits. All of these bodily changes put CN at a greater risk of dissecting her vertebral artery, especially when self-performing a very physically rough maneuver on her own neck. Typically, when light is shined into the eyes, the pupils will constrict so as to react to the amount of light. This is a reflex by the brainstem. When the pupils don't react, it means that something is wrong with the brainstem, and in CN, her pupils didn't react. Given that this was happening with a CT scan showing subarachnoid hemorrhage, and brain herniation, all of these are very bad signs, and things didn't get better for her. This didn't have to happen. CN had a lot of past negative experience with medicine. She had a significant past medical history of recurrent UTI, type 1 diabetes, fluoroquinolone-associated tendinopathy, hypertension, anxiety, and possible autoimmune disease. If you take the chiropractic part out of this, her turn to self-performed therapy was especially high risk, particularly given all the risk factors that she did have. To say that she didn't know may not be entirely correct. We see it in movies and TV when someone snaps somebody's neck and then they collapse to the floor. It's just in this case, hers wasn't a movie. It wasn't a joke. She actually did collapse and she was never able to get back up again. At autopsy, evidence of injury on the left side of her neck were found. When they looked at her heart, they saw that the left ventricle had been starting to hypertrophy consistent with her chronic hypertension. Diffuse cerebral edema was found with subarachnoid hemorrhage at the brainstem and the cerebellum. Blood clot was found in the right vertebral artery that was going into the right base of the skull, and this made sense because her injury was on the left side, so there was a contralateral impact given the nature of her maneuver. They found that her brain did herniate, that it did crush down into the base of her skull, and another part started folding in on the brain, causing the blood supply to those areas to choke off. All of this confirming that she did have vertebral artery dissection due to self-chiropractic cervical spine manipulation that resulted in fatal subarachnoid hemorrhage and cerebral hemorrhage. One of the most comprehensive warnings that I can give about this is that everything has a risk to benefit ratio. If you don't need to do it to your body or put it in your body, then don't. On a macro scale, there's a risk on doing studies. On the clinical side, we have good data on interventions that wouldn't happen in nature. For example, you're not going to find someone who does heart surgery on themselves. Or if you take a medicine, that chemical or the compound itself isn't something that's naturally made in the body or occurs in nature. So you wouldn't have accidentally gotten it in your body if you weren't actively trying to test it. And so we can study what happens to someone when they take it. That's fine and well, but studies aren't always clean cut like that. This is one reason why nutrition studies are so hard to do. They have infinite confounders. But other times, the published results from other studies aren't what you're supposed to actually get. My friend Kevin, also known as Bobby Broccoli, recently released a full-length documentary named 17 Pages, which is about a single paper that sparked off one of the largest scientific controversies of the 20th century. It was dubbed the Scientific Watergate, and it caught the attention of the national media and US Congress. The results of the scientific misconduct investigation still reverberate today. And if you want to check it out, it's only available on Nebula. Nebula is a streaming platform built by and for independent creators, including channels like my good friends Medlife Crisis, Patrick Kelly, and Joe Scott. You get early access, no ads, and videos that are thoughtful and well-researched. Plus, Nebula has a lot of really impressive original content that can't be found anywhere else, like 17 Pages. Come join us. Normally this would be $6 a month, but if you sign up at Nebula,
I have one big question.
Chubbyemu, which is the link in the description below, you'll receive
So,
a big 40% off a yearly
why is it that
subscription, which is
sometimes during the
$36 for the year,
damage
$3
phase there's
and
like
you'll get
Grim
full access to the
that
whole
fly,
platform.
and the other
with your
times there's like
subscription,
worms
you'll
that
get one
fly.
guest pass per month, so you
And
can
then
share with
sometimes there's
family
nothing.
and friends for 7 days, and they won't need to share any payment info to enjoy. Scan
Like
the
when you
QR
do-
code or click the link below to
like,
start watching now. All of this to
There's
say,
like
be careful of studies that
those
get
flying
thrown out
fucks
there.
in the sky,
By the time one
and then sometimes they're not there. Sometimes they're just those like floating worms that track you.
Floating ones
And then so-
attack you spawn from the Grim, which die to the light, most likely, or other AoE
Ew.
things.
Okay.
But yeah, they just come from the melee units when they're dying. You can
It's
avoid
pretty
it if
annoying
you really
too.
want to shoot the melee units during damage, but it's not recommended. Just have to deal with it like that.
You know, I have an SMG. I don't think I have the range
Yeah.
to do that. Hive kill worm and traveler give guardian. What? Okay.
Both those are truth.
Ace, Hive don't
Which
kill
one's-
one.
Oh wait, sorry, I thought you said darkness, not hive.
Do I have to turn off the true one or the false one?
Turn off truth, you're making lies to
Yeah,
set
you
up the
don't-
mechanism.
lie,
So, Traveler, Guardian, and Give go off, I think.
Hive kill worm is a lie.
Yes,
Alright.
because the hive are literally worm people.
So
Well, their power comes from worms, not so much.
Well, yeah. Yeah, they consumed them or something, right?
Just, something like that. Don't exactly know how they get to worm.
I love that if you know the lore, you can just skip the whole Grim thing, the
Yep.
Truth
Mhm.
Seeker thing. That is so cool and awesome and cool.
Sometimes Destiny does also do this. Oh,
Not often.
not so much recently, yeah.
A woman rubbed contaminated skin cream on her face. This is what happened to her brain. BD is a 46-year-old woman presenting to the emergency room with slurred speech and blurred vision. 2 weeks earlier, she was at this same emergency room because her hands had become weak. An intense pins and needles feeling turned them completely numb. Back then, it didn't seem like anything immediately life-threatening was happening to her, but now that she can't see or speak clearly, it means something terrible is happening to her. A few years ago,
If
BD
I'm,
believed that she had problems with
good enough at the
blemishes on
game,
her
I should
skin.
get the kill
To her,
here.
these dark spots were terrible signs of aging and sun damage, and she had to
You
do
doing solo
something about
flawless,
this
or?
before it was too late.
No, I
A friend
mean,
had told her about skin
it is
tightening
solo,
cream
it's
that
not
helps with
flawless,
this. These
and I won't get a
contain
chime
special
for it 'cause I
ingredients
loaded a
that were
checkpoint.
ethically sourced from various corners
No,
of the
from the
world
last time
that
I did this
gently
when I died on the
inactivate
door.
certain enzymes in the skin
Oh,
to
yeah, I
fix
remember
and
that.
prevent blemishes. These were so effective that access
So,
to this cream could only be had
I
through
just
special
want the
ordering
gun.
channels,
I
but
want
BD
the
was
gun.
in luck. Her friend had contact
So I don't have to
with
do
the
this
most
stupid dungeon
authoritative
ever
source
again.
on importing these creams, as she was able to order a large supply
Fair.
and start using them. BD applied this cream to her face.
I almost got
twice
Izanagi's
daily.
burden
The
done now,
blemishes were
so.
going away, but over
The
time she
burden is
started
almost
noticing
gone.
something.
Is the
was
quiver
wrong.
working?
One evening, BD suddenly emptied her stomach from both ends. When she rinsed out her mouth with water afterwards,
Fat
a
quiv.
metallic taste pierced.
I'm
into
popping
her
it like
cheeks.
right next
A
to the
burning
pillar instead of on
sensation
top of
rolled
it.
over
It's
her tongue,
working
but she
a
really
lot more
wasn't
for
sure what this
well,
was.
that
It didn't hurt,
consistently.
and it would come and go. Beatty didn't think too much about all of this happening, and she continued to apply the skin lightening cream to her face. One day, Beatty noticed that she kept dropping her phone. Originally, she thought that maybe it was just slippery, but a pins and needles feeling in her hands started getting more and more intense. It would wake her up at night. In the emergency room, doctors didn't find anything immediately life-threatening. They sent her home and scheduled an appointment with a different doctor who wanted her to come back after a couple weeks to see how she was doing.
Oh wait, the Grimm's
but
name is
Beatty
Truth
wasn't
Speaker,
going
so
to
you're
last a
literally
couple
just
more
like,
weeks. She started having
he says
trouble
the truth,
seeing,
and then you
she
just
couldn't drive
disable that
anymore.
truth because
She
well,
had
now
trouble
you're lying.
speaking because her family couldn't understand
Yeah.
what she was saying,
is so
and she
fun.
started having trouble walking, bringing us back to the emergency room where we are now. At examination, the medical team were concerned about two things. Beatty went from having weakness and numbness in her hands to having blurred vision,
1% left
unsteady
to go,
gait, and
baby.
slow speech, all in the time span of 2 weeks. The speed of her decline gives them clues as to what's happening, but not
I'll say
only
the catalyst
this,
for Izzy
where
is,
this
like,
is happening
just,
gives them a second
like,
set of clues.
so
Clearly, Beatty's problems are
mandatory.
related to her nerves, but where specifically? Her problem is not just some of her nerves, because it devolved into a problem spanning her entire body, from the way that she moves to her senses. This means that there could be something wrong with her brain, but an MRI reveals nothing wrong. There's no visible structural abnormalities.
Going to
Her
open
brain
the
isn't
door with an
swelling
SMG.
and folding on itself. It doesn't have anything abnormal
Hate it.
growing
I
out
actually
of
hate it.
She also doesn't have a fever, so this likely isn't an infection like meningitis. When
It's
the
faster
medical
with a
team
bow,
took
which is
routine
should not be
blood test,
the
They
case.
find that Beatty is
Really
normal.
funny.
As the days pass, they find that Beatty would have random, delirious episodes in between long periods of silence where she would sit there and stare into the void. When sounds came out of her mouth, they were just mumbles and screams. One of the new doctors on the team decided to order a blood test, different from the ones that had been done routinely. The final cause of Beatty's problems that hadn't really been looked through was a toxic one. And when they looked at the results,
Yay,
they find that
I did it.
Beatty's mercury levels are 1,400 times the upper limit of normal, and this explains everything happening to her. But what's in her blood is only a part of what's in her body, meaning that there's likely even more mercury that's absorbed into her organs. So, how did she get this much mercury in her blood? This brings us to the idea of absorption. Mercury is a metal. It's the only one that's liquid at room temperature.